Good day, everyone. I'm Steve Snyman, your host and your educator on your journey to reverse your insulin resistance easily, to fix insulin resistance easily. So welcome from the Fire Diabetes headquarters. Today I'm joined by Dr. Stephen Schmidt, our physician and gastroenterologist on our team. Hi, Stephen.
Good morning, Steph, and welcome to everyone. Hello, everyone.
So today we have a short little video to discuss bloods. It's the beginning of the year. Some of you may still have some funds left in your medical aid. So it's a good time of the year to do your baseline bloods again, or your bloods to determine how you've progressed in reversing your insulin resistance. So I've asked Stephen to discuss with us our list of bloods that we recommend to get drawn at the pathology lab. So Stephen, let's start with it. The first thing that we would like to discuss is your HbA1c and your fasting glucose. And this is obviously in the order of importance. We're going to list the 6 things that we recommend. So why HbA1c? What is that all about? And fasting glucose?
Okay, so the best way to explain HbA1c and a fasting glucose or a spot glucose is almost to say that you are comparing a video with a photo. If you do a fasting glucose, you have one value representing that day or that morning, that moment that you took the blood, and you get a fair idea of where your blood glucose is. Obviously, these measurements are more applicable to diabetics rather than pre-diabetics and people who had previously normal HbA1cs and glucose. So if you can get your fasting glucose serially down, in other words, it's a form of progress. Your HbA1c is a videotape, if you want, of the previous 3 months. So it's more a mean or an average of how you have progressed in not, and I'm going to use a medical term now or a biochemical term, not glycating your hemoglobin. In other words, not attaching sugar to your hemoglobin. So it's a good measurement over a period of time.
So sort of an overview of your blood glucose control over the past 3 months, something like that.
Exactly. So there are certain aims, and I don't think we want to use aims as they do in strict guidelines in endocrinology, but you want to get to a value always lower than the previous one, and obviously the mother lode or the holy grail would be to have a normal HbA1c.
So that's around 5.5, am I right? We target for about 5.5.
Right. 5.5 would be fantastic. So if your initial HbA1c was say 8 or 9 and you continuously come down, so the idea of blood tests is not for us to test your savings account in your medical aid. The idea of serial blood tests is to monitor your progress, and primarily the HbA1c and the fasting glucose gives us an idea of how you are responding to the way that we are managing you.
Okay.
There's a little bit of a difference with some of the other bloods, and I'll explain it now.
And then something that very few doctors is actually measuring this. And that's the insulin, the fasting insulin level.
Yeah, it's diabolical, actually. I remember a few years ago, a pathologist phoned me and asked me, why am I doing so many fasting insulins? So the fasting insulin is a direct indication of where you are. To give you an example, famous medical aid tends to do vitality, well, yeah, I say it now, it tends to do baseline bloods by doing a blood glucose at the clinic or so, and then you say, okay, your blood glucose is fine, therefore you are normal. But that's not the case, because your insulin levels at that stage could be sky high. So insulin is far more sensitive to tell us whether you are insulin resistant or not, number one. Number two, you want your insulin levels compared to your blood glucose to become a certain value, an ideal value. And
again, 5.5 for insulin.
Again, 5.5.
5.5 again, yeah.
Exactly. So if you can get your fasting insulin and your blood glucose or your HbA1c more or less in the same ballpark, then you are reaching perfection almost. And then, of course, the serial measurements of those, because your insulin levels coming down is not always a direct indication of how compliant you are with the program. It is very individual. So some people really respond rather quickly, and some people do not. But as long as we have a pattern of lowering your fasting insulin levels as you go along, that is success. Stay stable or decrease. We don't want these insulin levels to go up.
Yeah, because often we get people who tell us, well, my HbA1c and my blood glucose are normals. I'm not a diabetic, so I'm fine. But then you measure their insulin level and it's about 40, 50. I mean, they can sell the insulin. So they are highly insulin resistant. They're just lucky that they haven't crossed that chasm to become a diabetic yet. So it's so important to do the insulin level.
You know, that's why many people across the world that practice this kind of medicine, and we're in good company because most of these people are really brilliant as far as biochemistry is concerned, actually want to move away from calling this illness diabetes. They want to move into a realm where they call it hyperinsulinism, which is a tongue twister, or insulin resistance, or some other thing, because the thing that is abnormal is the insulin. So if you have a high insulin and a normal blood glucose, then I can predict, based on previous research, which is done in South Africa, so by the way, in the 60s, 70s, I can predict the onset of your diabetes by 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
So you have to have a normal insulin level, and a normal insulin level or a normalizing insulin level is also an indication that you are unclogging your organs from those visceral fats, and you are unclogging your muscle cells from those visceral fats. You are taking down the resistance to insulin, so insulin can do its job easier. The pancreas doesn't have to work so hard by making high levels. Yeah. So it's a very good indication of where the patient is going and how well the patient is doing. Again, in my way of doing things, if you get a radical drop, absolutely fantastic. If you get stabilization, then you can sort of, just investigate a little bit. But obviously, if your insulin levels go higher than whatever it is that we are doing, or you as a patient is doing, there's something wrong, and then we need to investigate it. So it's important for us to do objective measurements of whether your compliance is good, number one. In other words, are you being naughty or not? Naughty is a stupid word, but you know what I mean. And the second thing is, sometimes people are so good in their view, but they are not aware of the fact that they are doing hidden sugars and hidden carbohydrates and hidden seed oils. Then we can go and investigate those people and find out why that is.
And another thing, obviously, also apart from the deliberate or non-deliberate cheating, is if you had a very stressful morning before you went to draw your blood, because stress and high cortisol levels also raise your insulin. Then you think, but I'm not cheating, and my insulin is now double than it was 3 months ago, and you're disheartened. But don't go on a morning when you had a very stressful, when you sat in the traffic or you crashed your car or the dog was stolen or whatever. Don't do bloods on a day like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Turn around and make absolutely sure. I did mine once because I was insulin resistant. I didn't mine once and got a fright of my life, only to realize afterwards that I'd had a cup of coffee in the early hours in the morning and I'd stuck some sugar in it. So be careful, be very sure that you were fasting. That is also one other thing to just negate that little problem a little bit, is that you do ratios. If you do an insulin and a glucose ratio, and you had to you were in an unfortunate situation where both those levels have gone up. The ratios would still stay the same. But yes, absolutely. If you have just shouted at the neighbor's dog and the taxi drove in front of you and rather turn around and go back and go and relax and go another day, that's a very important point that you make.
Yeah. Good. So let's look at the next one on our list, and that is vitamin D levels, also a predictor of how you're doing.
Yeah, I must say vitamin D, you know, they used to say at university when we were studying, if you knew diabetes and alcoholism and the other one was syphilis, then you know the body, because it affects everything in the body. And vitamin D is falling into that little group for me because it is such an incredibly complicated molecule, so incredibly complicated. So there are studies that show that if you are insulin resistant, it affects your vitamin D levels. There are also studies that do the opposite correlation. If your vitamin D levels are low, then you are causing insulin resistance. And interestingly enough, the same sort of argument is coming out in a viral infection vitamin D level comparison. So some people are saying it's because your vitamin D levels are low that you are more susceptible to these viral infections. And I'm certainly in that group, and I think you are as well. But other people have started speculating that possibly if you're in an IC situation, you have an ICU situation, and you have a very bad viral infection that can actually sort of drain your vitamin D levels. So it's very complicated. But if you are improving your insulin resistance, then your vitamin D levels are going to stabilize and normalize. If a person is really taking the doses that we recommend for vitamin D, and the insulin levels and the glucose levels and the HbA1c is not that impressive, and you see these levels not wanting to go up, there are two questions you need to ask yourself. Are you using a good product? Few questions. Are you using a decent product? Are you combining that product with something fatty because it's a fat-soluble vitamin? And number three, is your insulin resistance not hampering your normalizing of your vitamin D levels? So it's complicated. But I am so gobsmacked with vitamin D that I honestly and truly believe that you have to have normal and high levels as we recommend to negate so many other symptoms and illnesses. Not
also mental health conditions. I mean, stuff that came
mental
up
health.
recently is if people
Yes.
with depression or bipolar, if you treat them with high dosages of vitamin D to get their blood levels, you know, somewhere between 50 and 80. Our target is 80 nanograms per milliliter. It helps a lot for their mood.
And other illnesses like multiple sclerosis.
Yes.
There's a fascinating story in multiple sclerosis at a period in time where Australia, the kids wore hats and they covered themselves in sunblock from head to toe, and there was a rise in multiple sclerosis.
Yeah.
And then for reasons of bone density, that at one stage they created what they called sun schools, which kids had to go out in summer and had to get sunlight for vitamin D levels, and then multiple sclerosis prevalence and incidence dropped. So there's a correlation between those two. There's a correlation between vitamin D levels and so many chronic illnesses. So it is imperative for us to know that your levels are in a range where we want them to be.
Yeah. So, and obviously,
and also, I also just want to add to that. If we are saying that the products we want you to use, we'd rather supply, or we would rather recommend. Not that we're trying to sell product, but we know that our product is the real deal. We also know that a lot of the multivitamins and other products and some very well-known products are completely underdosed and not a good product at all. That's very important to understand. So there are certain makes that we recommend that we know that the company is solid and the product is good.
And the other thing with vitamin D is by taking vitamin D supplementation, for one person you may give 5,000 units a day, and they will reach their blood level of 80 easily. Others you have to give it once a week and they'll get there. So it's every person is different. So that's why it's important to sort of measure your vitamin D levels every 3 to 6 months, so that you can play around. So okay, I must take this dosage of the supplement so that I can keep my blood level at 80. Stephen, the next one that we have on our list is triglycerides and HDL. Why do we ask people to do that?
Okay, so this is something that is very important to me and very close to my heart. And that is triglycerides especially is, to me, one of the most sensitive ways of correlating whether a person is not ingesting the wrong foods or the wrong substances. So I use triglycerides as a direct measure of whether the person is eating according to what we profess he must eat, and correctly that is. An abnormal cholesterol, it's a complicated subject, but doctors look at total cholesterols and they look at LDLs. Total cholesterol and LDL are two of the weakest parameters that you can get. HDL, which is your good cholesterol, which is the one that cleans up all the mess. It's like a municipal truck that drives behind or picks up black bags in the streets and cleans up the streets. That's your HDL. And you are going to normalize or at least increase your HDL, which you want, and decrease and normalize your triglycerides, which you want, by stopping consuming seed oils, fructose, refined carbohydrates, especially. So that's a very good measurement of how the person is eating. Yeah. If I do a triglyceride in a person and I see the triglycerides are low and the HDL is normal, then I've got a very difficult case to try and make out that that person is not eating well.
Yeah, and especially the ratio, you always teach us the ratio triglyceride to HDL must be lower than 1. If it's lower than 1, then we know that you're on your way, you're not cheating, and you're making enormous progress.
Yeah, lower than 1 is maybe a bit rough. I'd say, what the books say 2, I sort of say it must be close to 1. So it's between 0 something and 1.5.
Well, what I can say, what we can say is that when people get on fire, it's usually above 2.
Yeah.
After a year, I haven't had one person where it's not under 1.
I use myself as that parameter. I can honestly say, without being rude to a person, if your triglycerides are 2, 3, 4, you are not following the program. Whether you know that you're not following the program or whether you are taking in hidden, forbidden things, you just simply aren't following the program. And that's a very good measurement. A very good measurement.
So that's, and then we get to another one, which is uric acid.
Yes, your uric acid again. You can certainly uric acid is an acid that can crystallize in your joints and cause gout. Now, the old conception of gout is eating too much meat, drinking too much alcohol, and that might be so because it's a complicated subject. But there's certain things, especially fructose, which is the sweetness in everything that we eat. High fructose corn syrup is now everywhere. It's ubiquitous. There are certain chocolates and things that you get from Europe that still contain cane sugar, but most of them are fructose. And the breakdown product of high doses of fructose is uric acid. So invariably, if you start going onto the FIRE diet and you exclude the seed oils and fructose, your uric acid levels are going to come down. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated because gout is not an easy illness, and you first have to lower the levels by using medications. But that's not the question. Is why do we measure it? If you take a person that's very insulin resistance, the high insulin, he's always going to have a high triglyceride, a low HDL, and a high uric acid, almost always. And then you measure those 4 parameters parameters to look for progress.
And lastly, your urea electrolytes and your creatinine or your kidney function.
Yes. So UNE and creatinine is a measurement of your kidney function. I would say that these measurements are probably more directed at people who had previously abnormal UNE and creatinine or renal function, or if you do it for the first time.
We have a kidney disease, a known chronic kidney disease.
Yeah, the point that you have to understand about insulin resistance and diabetes is it is actually a disease of the vascular system or of the blood supply, whether it is in the small capillaries or the medium capillaries arteries or the larger ones. So way before your blood glucose becomes abnormal, it is already hurting the tiny, tiny vessels of the eye and of the kidney. And you can already get abnormality in your kidney function, which you can measure in different ways. Once your UNE, which is as the urea and your electrolytes and your creatinine, those three measurements, once they start going up, you've already lost a significant, or I won't say lost, but you've already had significant damage to that small capillary network. So it's important for us to know that that is normal. In a person who's had previous kidney function abnormalities, we want to use that measurement to see that that blood flow is improving, that onslaught in the kidneys is going away, and you can actually normalize that abnormal renal function.
Good. Thank you, Stephen. This was a quick snapshot of why we are recommending you to get some bloods drawn again, so that by the end of the year, or in 6 months' time, you can compare it to where you are now. So we really appreciate your time, Stephen, and your wisdom, and the nice way how you're explaining it. I always learn so much from you. Thank you so much.